The DC Extended Universe. What was once seen as a potential rival to the massively successful Marvel Cinematic Universe is now being abandoned after 16 movies and one show spanning a 10-year lifetime. Movies in general have to earn 2.5 times their budget to break even, and the DCEU's box office has been erratic to say the least. So throughout this documentary, you will see some movies easily earn a profit and others failing to break even. This documentary highlights the 8 key moments of the DCEU. So join me today on this journey as we explore the downfall of the DCEU. In 2013, Zack Snyder's Man of Steel released, a movie that was originally offered to Christopher Nolan, most famous for the Dark Knight trilogy, who recommended to Warner Brothers that Zack Snyder should direct the Superman reboot. If successful, Warner Brothers would push ahead in creating a shared universe, and Snyder managed to bring in $667 million at the box office with a $225 million budget, a 56% critic score, and a 75% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Warner Brothers, very happy with the movie, proceeded to allow Snyder to make a sequel. At San Diego Comic-Con in 2013, Zack Snyder and Harry Lennix announced to the world the next movie in Superman's story.
I want you to remember, Clark, in all the years to come, in all your most private moments, I want you to remember my hand at your throat. I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
Whoa! What? What? What?
The Superman sequel was now The Dark Knight versus The Man of Steel, titled Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, implying the dawn of the Justice League. Now, according to Jay Oliva, who worked with Snyder on all his DC movies, Snyder had shown Oliva storyboards back in 2013, before Man of Steel came out, of Batman v Superman with a Dark Knight Returns Batman, the Batman of which Ben Affleck's portrayal was inspired by, which confirms that Snyder already had an idea of Superman facing Batman in the next movie. However, that original idea was then accelerated by Warner Brothers into a full setup for the Justice League. Warner Brothers were trying to play catch-up, desperate for that MCU success. So while Snyder was focusing on his story, Warner Brothers had him accelerate the process to build to that Avengers competitor movie. So Snyder expanded his original plan. The next year, Warner Brothers announced 9 new DC movies coming to the DC slate that would span over the next 7 years, some of which to this day still have not been made. The DC Extended Universe looked an exciting prospect, however Warner Brothers executives were impatient. They saw the success of the MCU and wanted to replicate that. Snyder was planning his own DC story over 5 movies, which Warner Brothers allowed. Originally there were 4, but Warner Brothers changed his plan, so they expanded it to 5. Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and a Justice League trilogy. But with Snyder planning his own storyline, Warner Brothers decided they wanted to build around that whilst letting Snyder do his own thing, at least for the time being. During pre-production of Batman v Superman, Warner Brothers executives were not happy with the original script, so brought in Oscar-winning writer Chris Terrio to help rewrite it. So with their rewritten screenplay, the film went into production. However, in post-production, Warner Brothers instructed Snyder that they needed to cut 30 minutes from the movie to reduce the runtime. The goal behind this was to squeeze in more screenings of the film, which in turn can increase revenue, but was a short-sighted decision. Whilst the movie managed to earn $872 million at the box office from a $263 million budget and a 63% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, the critics' reviews were not so positive. They bashed the movie, and Chris Terrio revealed in 2019 that cuts to Batman v Superman ordered by Warner Brothers executives undermined what would have been a solid picture. These cuts ultimately sabotaged the narrative, according to Terrio, likely leading to the negative reception of the movie. Terrio said, "If you took 30 minutes out of Argo as they were from Batman v Superman, it would make zero sense at all. Critics would say, what's a lazy screenplay because the characters don't have motivations and it's not coherent. And I would agree with them. This was the first sign of studio interference and unfortunately wasn't the end. Based on the backlash from critics for Batman v Superman, Warner Brothers put Jeff Johns and John Berg in charge of overlooking all DC projects. During Batman v Superman's creation, Snyder was also expanding beyond that movie, now venturing out to the Justice League trilogy. Snyder went from Batman v Superman right into Justice League, and so began drawing up a plan for 2 Justice League sequels, planned to be filmed back to back. I will come back to this a little bit later. Then came along Suicide Squad, the third movie in the DCEU, and with the reactive executives came more studio interference. Unfortunately, it was no longer trimming down the movie, but also ordered reshoots. The movie began production at the end of the first quarter of 2015, which was before Batman v Superman was released, and in January of 2016, the first trailer came out, implying a darker, more serious tone, similar to what was released before. However, based on the critics' bashing of Batman v Superman and executives' obsession with the MCU, the executives decided they wanted the DCEU to move away from their own tone and to become similar to Marvel. As Suicide Squad went into post-production, reshoots were ordered by executives, and according to director David Ayer, those executives saw the recent reception of Deadpool and wanted Suicide Squad to be similar to that movie. Deadpool opened and then they never tested Batman v Superman, so they put the movie out there and they never did a test, Ayer said, and they were expecting a different result, and then they got hammered by all the critics, and then it's like, okay, we're going to turn David Ayer's dark, soulful movie into a comedy now. And if you compare the first Suicide Squad trailer to the last trailer, you can see a clear difference in tone. From the dark, soulful movie Ayer described to a comedy. The reshoots that were written by Jeff Johns made a massive difference to the tone and quality of the film, leading to disappointing reviews. However, the movie still managed to earn $745 million at the box office with a $175 million budget, but unfortunately had a 58% audience score and a 26% critic score. But Warner Brothers executives didn't think that decline was their fault. In their eyes, it must have been because their movies were too different to Marvel's. And then came Wonder Woman, which began production in November 2015, to another movie that went into production before Batman v Superman was released to audiences worldwide. The movie that went back in time to World War I to tell the story of Diana of Themyscira, directed by Patty Jenkins and a story by Alan Heinberg, Zack Snyder and Jason Fuchs. Now, this movie unfortunately couldn't escape reshoots either. Patty Jenkins confirmed that the final act had some major reshoots forced by the studio. She said, "That was the only thing that the studio forced my hand on, was that it was not supposed to be, it was supposed to be like that he never turns into Ares," said Jenkins. "The whole point of the movie is that you get there to the big monster and he's just standing there looking at you saying, 'I didn't do anything.' And then the studio kept saying, 'We'll let you do that and then we'll see.' And then I could feel it creeping up, and then at the last minute, they were like, 'You know what? We want Ares to show up.' And I was like, 'God damn, we don't have time to do that right now.' And nope, you gotta do it. And most people argue that the ending of the film was the weakest part of the movie, and of course that was a Warner Brothers decision. The movie still managed to earn $817 million at the box office with a budget of $150 million, a 93% critic score, and an audience score of 83%, the highest rating the DCEU had so far. So things looked like they were heading back in the right direction. But no, Warner Brothers were not finished there. In late 2015, Zack Snyder had Jeff Johns and Jim Lee write and draw the final 2 stories after Justice League 1. Now remember, from the original film slate, there were only meant to be 2 Justice League movies, Part 1 and Part 2. However, Warner Brothers changed that to 3 movies as they felt it was too bloated. So now in 3 Justice League films, Snyder began planning. Justice League 1's story was complete, and then was born the infamous Justice League 2 and 3 storyboards. These storyboards were setting up a darker future that was hinted at in Batman v Superman, a confusing scene of a nightmare future where Superman was evil, but it was all to be explained in the 2 Justice League sequels. So with this plan created, focus was then turned to Justice League 1. However, before that film began production, Warner Brothers forced Snyder and Chris Terrio to change parts of the story, such as Bruce Wayne and Lois Lane having a baby together, and were told to make an overall lighter tone. So Snyder and Terrio did so, but whilst some parts were changed, the key elements stayed the same, and with those changes approved, Justice League went into production. Production of Justice League began in April of 2016 and ended in October the same year, with Snyder managing to film almost everything he needed for his Justice League movie, even with Warner Brothers making it persistently difficult for him. According to The Wrap, several Warner Brothers executives went to the then president Greg Silverman asking him to remove Zack Snyder from Justice League. Silverman was quite harsh on Zack, but production was too far along and they were about to start rolling. The decision to keep Snyder on Justice League ultimately came from Warner Brothers CEO Kevin Sugihara. However, DC Films president John Berg was sent to London to oversee the movie's production. Post-production then began in November of 2016, but unfortunately in May of 2017, Zack Snyder had to step down from the movie after his daughter Autumn Snyder had passed away. When this unfortunately happened, Warner Brothers claimed they had hired Avengers director Joss Whedon to finish the film in Snyder's vision. However, when the movie was released, it was clear this was not the case. Warner Brothers used this moment to do what they always wanted to do, move away from Snyder's serious and mature vision and towards Marvel's lighter-hearted tone, and so with the hiring of Joss Whedon, they began the $25 million worth of reshoots. Now, if you don't know, most movies have reshoots worth $5 to $10 million, so for Justice League to have $25 million worth of reshoots implies major changes. However, these reshoots were extremely noticeable, and so was the overall change from Snyder's vision. The sudden increase in humor and saturation of colors indicated a clear sign of Warner Brothers' intent, and a noticeable badly CGI'd upper lip on Henry Cavill made the reshoots obvious. Whilst the Justice League reshoots were happening, Cavill had moved on to Mission Impossible, where his character had a moustache, and Paramount did not let Henry Cavill shave the moustache for the Justice League reshoots. So the Justice League reshoot team decided the best decision to make was to try and CGI the moustache off of Henry Cavill, which made it far easier to recognize which scenes are reshoots and which were originally shot by Snyder. But even Joss Whedon was given strict instructions by the studio too, being told the movie couldn't be longer than 2 hours, and this was because the studio executives wanted to squeeze in as many screenings as possible, but didn't really care about the impact that would have on storytelling. As many of you know, Snyder's films are not short, and so the original story that Snyder filmed would not work with a 2-hour runtime, which made the reshoots even more difficult to turn into a cohesive story. Most thought delaying the movie and ensuring the CGI and storytelling were improved was the logical answer. However, there appears to be a darker motive behind it all. In 2017, AT&T and Time Warner were in the middle of an $85 billion deal that they were hoping would close by the end of the year. One source told The Wrap that Warner Brothers CEO Kevin Sugihara and President Toby Emmerich wanted to preserve their bonuses they would be paid before the merger, and were worried that if they delayed the movie, then their bonuses would have been delayed to the following year, and they might not still be at the studio. So the motive behind not delaying the movie was reportedly corporate greed, which can paint quite a strong picture regarding the executives at Warner Brothers at the time. And the reshoots turned out to be the major talking point of the movie, with most feeling like this didn't feel like a continuation of Snyder's story. The movie managed to make $655 million at the box office with a $300 million plus budget, a 39% critic score, and a 67% audience score, so a noticeable drop in box office and reviews from Wonder Woman 1. The confusion from fans in the final product sparked a monumental movement called Release the Snyder Cut. In May 2017, Aquaman began filming, roughly the same time Snyder left Justice League, and Aquaman ended production in October the same year. In early 2018, whilst Aquaman was in post-production, Walter Hamada was hired as the new president of DC. Before this, John Berg and Jeff Johns were overlooking the DCEU, as well as their boss, Toby Emmerich, who were all major influencers on the Justice League reshoots, and they were in fact written by Jeff Johns. Ever since Batman v Superman, those executives wanted to get away from Snyder's vision, and were finally able to when Snyder left the Justice League project. With Walter Hamada now in charge, they were able to have a fresh start and continue in their lighter-hearted direction. However, Hamada had no hand in creating Aquaman 1. The movie was in post-production when he arrived, so Walter Hamada had no influence or help in the $1.1 billion that Aquaman 1 made at the box office, with a $160 million budget, a 65% critic score, and a 73% audience score. A mega success for the DC Extended Universe that surely would help see the DCEU kick off after this big box office success. Well, unfortunately not. Still, to this day, not a single DCEU movie since the release of Aquaman has been able to earn even half of Aquaman's box office. In April of 2018, Mission Impossible director Christopher McQuarrie stated in an interview with comicbook.com that he had discussed ideas for a Man of Steel sequel with Henry Cavill on the set of Mission Impossible Fallout. And in June 2018, a merger between AT&T and Warner Media finalized, meaning AT&T were now in charge of Warner Brothers. In March of 2019, Warner Brothers CEO Kevin Sugihara resigned after a very worrying case involving a female actress, and in came Ann Sarnoff to replace him, and Sarnoff becoming the new boss of Toby Emmerich, who was the boss of Walter Hamada. Less than a month later, Warner Brothers went on record stating the Snyder Cut did not exist after fans had rallied outside Warner Brothers' Burbank office asking to see the cut. With the majority of fans being respectful, unfortunately some fans decided to be toxic towards Warner Brothers employees. Almost a year later, in April of 2019, Shazam 1 released worldwide, a relatively unknown character about a boy who gets the powers of the gods. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to interest audiences, with only managing to earn $363 million at the box office with an $85 million budget, but was able to earn a 90% critic score and an 82% audience score. However, when Shazam 1 released, there also came confusion amongst fans as to why a faceless Superman appeared at the end of the movie instead of Henry Cavill. Some claim it was scheduling conflicts, others claim it was to do with money or a bad relationship with the new heads of DC and Warner Brothers. Whatever the reasoning was, What we do know is that Henry Cavill wasn't in the movie. However, he still wanted to play Superman, but according to Christopher McQuarrie in July of 2019, it was Warner Brothers who were not interested in Superman returning to the DCEU. He stated, "The studios have never cared for my original ideas. They prefer that I fix their broken ones. They never said no, they just never moved on it. This was just before Fallout was released, and no, I would not reconsider. There's too many other things I want to do." And then came August of 2019, where Release the Snyder Cut fans had continued pushing for the elusive Snyder Cut, raising money for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, as well as crowdfunding billboards and sky banners timed to Comic-Con International in San Diego, with even Snyder stoking the fire by releasing exclusive black and white images from his cut of Justice League on the social media app Vero. And Jason Momoa even casually mentioned in an Instagram post that Snyder had showed him the Snyder Cut. These actions were hyping the fanbase even more, and with AT&T now making the calls, there was a chance that this could actually happen. On November 17th, 2019, the 2-year anniversary of Justice League's release, Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot, Ray Fisher, and Zack Snyder all posted #ReleaseTheSnyderCut. Now there was some real power behind this movement, with the cast also supporting the hashtag, and this fueled fans for the next 6 months. Now in January of 2020, Mission Impossible director Christopher McQuarrie tweeted out regarding Warner Brothers' lack of interest in his Superman idea. "I asked once, I will never ask again," he said. "They have their own problems and I sympathize deeply. But after 25 years of hearing no, even an idiot like me gets the message. I go where I'm valued." So clearly he did not appreciate the studio's lack of interest in his Superman pitch. Before most of the world had been affected by the pandemic, in February of 2020, Birds of Prey was released, a movie that hadn't really been asked for by fans, and the box office showed it, only making $201 million at the box office with an $82 million budget. But surprisingly having a 78% critic score and audience score. So that's now 2 box office drops in a row, both produced by Walter Hamada. In May of 2020, Zack Snyder hosted a virtual Man of Steel watch party. After the movie ended, Zack had Henry Cavill join him along with many fans. This was the very moment the Release the Snyder Cut movement had been dreaming of.
When will you release the Snyder Cut?
There it is.
It's a hard question. I don't know. What do you think, Henry?
I reckon you should show it.
We're doing it.
Zack Snyder confirmed that they were releasing the Snyder Cut in 2021 on HBO Max. AT&T, the owners of Warner Brothers, allowed Zack Snyder to release his full version of Justice League, and this broke the internet. Nothing like this had ever happened before, and it showed that fans' demand did have an influence on the studio. There were, however, other factors to consider that helped the Snyder Cut to be released. Firstly, their new streaming platform that was releasing soon, HBO Max. They needed people's attention to get subscribing to their streaming service, and the Snyder Cut was the perfect way to do so. The second was that the pandemic was stronger than ever, so a lot of productions were on hold, and so releasing this highly in-demand movie that needs far less work than brand new movies and one that can be released on their new streaming platform was a no-brainer. But the point still stands. Fans could see that their voices did influence the studio. 2 months later, in July of 2020, Ray Fisher decided to speak up against the abuse he and others endured on the Justice League reshoots, stating Joss Whedon's on-set treatment of the cast and crew of Justice League was gross, abusive, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable. He was enabled in many ways by Jeff Johns and John Berg. Accountability over entertainment. This caused an entire investigation to happen that to this day hasn't been fully resolved. However, since then, we have seen Jeff Johns, John Berg, and Joss Whedon all disappear from Warner Brothers. However, Fisher wasn't done there, as when he brought this up to Walter Hamada, Fisher claimed Hamada tried to throw Whedon under the bus to save Johns and Berg from any further punishment. And this tweet from Ray Fisher summarizes his thoughts on the matter when Walter Hamada left DC in 2022. Walter Hamada tried to protect his toxic and discriminatory colleagues. He failed, he tried to bury me, and the Justice League investigation with lies in the trades. He failed. He is a product product of old Hollywood cronyism. May we never experience his like again. Onward. Accountability over entertainment. So due to the drama that happened whilst the Justice League reshoots were going on, the way Hamada reportedly tried to protect his colleagues during the investigation of 2020, and the box office decline of the DCEU, the reputation of Warner Bros. And DC was declining. In December of 2020, Wonder Woman 1984 was simultaneously released on streaming and in theaters, which led to a low box office performance, only making $170 million at the box office with a $200 million budget and a 58% critic score, but had a 73% audience score. It also had viewership numbers on HBO Max, but here is where it gets confusing. Warner Bros. Don't officially release any numbers for their DC streaming shows or movies, so we don't have precise numbers. We only have third-party sources. So we shall return to Wonder Woman 1984's streaming numbers when we can refer to other DC streaming movies. Then came the Snyder Cut's release, which was meant to happen on March 18th of 2021. However, Warner Bros. Accidentally leaked it a week before. Somehow, when HBO Max users clicked on the Tom and Jerry movie, they were able to watch the Snyder Cut, something that to many fans didn't feel like an accident. Now, Snyder has made it very clear that whilst he was working on the Snyder Cut, Warner Bros. Made it very difficult for him, so some fans feel that the accidental leak wasn't so accidental. We have to remember that Toby Emmerich, the same executive who wanted Snyder gone and changed Justice League when Snyder left, was still in charge when Snyder returned to complete his cut of Justice League. So fans theorized that Emmerich making it difficult for Snyder was due to his fear that the Snyder Cut's release would show up his mistake in reshooting the Justice League movie. But when the 4-hour director's cut of Justice League officially released on HBO Max on March 18th, 2021, it caused HBO Max to crash all around the world, as fans all tried to watch the movie at the same time. The movie managed to earn a 71% critic score and a 94% audience score, and a week after the movie was released, #RestoreTheSnyderverse trended on Twitter, hitting 1.5 million tweets, which was a record number of tweets for a movie. If you don't know, Restore the Snyderverse means asking Warner Bros. To allow Snyder to make the original story he had planned for Justice League 2 and 3. However, 4 days after the Snyder Cut was released, Ann Sarnoff attempted to squash those hopes, and stated in an interview that regarding the Restore the Snyderverse hashtag, the Snyder Cut was the completion of his trilogy, which angered fans as the movie ends on a cliffhanger with Darkseid ready to invade Earth. Calling it a trilogy was her attempt at silencing those who wanted more. However, this only fueled Snyderverse fans more. Whilst most continued to push the one hashtag Restore the Snyderverse, a vocal minority within the fandom began another hashtag too. Hashtag Boycott Warner Brothers. The issues Ray Fisher had with Warner Brothers executives, along with the fact that the DCEU was continuing to make movies they were not interested in, and Ann Sarnoff declaring that Snyder's DC films were a trilogy, didn't sit well with some Snyderverse fans, and used that as motivation behind their other hashtag. And whilst most who were using the boycott hashtag were using it because they were truly concerned about the alleged treatment of employees on Warner Bros. Sets, unfortunately some decided to use the hashtag as their way of saying, if you don't restore the Snyderverse, I will boycott your company. Now, before Zack Snyder's Justice League was released, the Release the Snyder Cut fans had not been pushing for a boycott, and their positive actions, such as raising money for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, helped their cause. However, it appeared that the success of the Snyder Cut's release caused some fans to believe that they were entitled to see more, not simply asking to see what happens next, like what most Snyderverse fans were doing, but were demanding to see the Snyderverse restored, and until that happens, they would boycott Warner Brothers. And in doing so, they may have shot themselves in the foot. Whilst boycotting can work, there were simply not enough customers following their footsteps. Many did not agree with their motivations, their execution of the boycott, or didn't even care enough to boycott in the first place. So their motivation may have been to restore the Snyderverse, but in doing so, tarnished the reputation of the movement. 4 months after the Snyder Cut's release, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad released theatrically and on HBO Max simultaneously. The movie had a budget of $185 million, but only earned $167 million at the box office, but had a 90% critic score and an 82% audience score. So now with 3 DCEU movies releasing on HBO Max, we have streaming numbers that we can compare to one another. Samba TV have provided their third-party numbers and have said that based on the 28 million US households who use Samba TV, and of those who opted into their viewership being tracked and who are subscribed to HBO Max, The Suicide Squad had 4.7 million households watching it on HBO Max in the first 17 days. Wonder Woman 1984 had 3.9 million households, and the Snyder Cut had 3.2 million households. Now remember, this is HBO Max only, and HBO Max had a staggered worldwide availability. So for these 3 movies, many countries did not have access to HBO Max, and so had to watch these films through other streaming services. And if we look at this graph showing the subscribers for HBO Max, we can see that when Wonder Woman 1984 released in Q4 of 2020, the platform had 41.5 million subscribers. Then, in the first quarter of 2021, when the Snyder Cut released, their subscribers increased to 44.2 million subscribers, and that number then increased again to 47 million subscribers in Q2, but then dropped to 45.2 million subscribers when the Suicide Squad released in Q3. So as you can see, the Suicide Squad had a 3.7 million subscriber advantage on Wonder Woman 1984 and a 1 million subscriber advantage on the Snyder Cut. So that is important context to be aware of. Another piece of context to be aware of is the fact that Wonder Woman 1984 and the Suicide Squad were both available theatrically as well as on streaming, whereas the Snyder Cut was only available on streaming. So we don't know how much more those 2 movies would have made if they were released only theatrically, with or without the pandemic going on, and if they were only available on streaming, how many more views they would have had. And on the flip side, Justice League 2017 made $655 million at the box office, and the general public's perception of the Snyder Cut was that it was just a director's cut of a movie that released 4 years ago. The 4-hour runtime could also have put some people off at the beginning. However, according to Variety, Zack Snyder's Justice League was the 4th most streamed movie of 2021. So not just on HBO Max, but worldwide, on every platform. The truth is, the only people who truly know the precise numbers for DC's streamed movies are Warner Brothers, who strangely kept that information private. And in late 2022, Warner Bros. Discovery was sued for lying about the number of subscribers they had on HBO Max pre-merger, exaggerating the number by around 10 million subscribers according to The Wrap. So many of their statistics could be inaccurate to benefit themselves or any narrative they wish to push. In January of 2022, Walter Hamada's next DC-produced project was James Gunn's Peacemaker. The spin-off show was stated to break HBO Max original records. However, the streaming service had only been available for less than 2 years at this moment in time, so it didn't exactly have many other originals to compete with. So whilst having higher numbers than any other Max original so far as Progress, it didn't have much to compete with. However, audiences and critics alike seemed to really enjoy the show, with critics giving the series a 94% score and an audience score of 89%. 638,000 US households watched the premiere in the first 4 days. However, this dropped to 584,000 households for the finale. But this didn't stop a second season being greenlit by DC President Walter Hamada. In April of 2022, the merger between Warner Bros. And Discovery finalized, creating the brand new company Warner Bros. Discovery, now run by David Zaslav of Discovery, replacing Ann Sarnoff. Much was to change over the next 8 months within the business, with the old regime slowly being pushed out. First to go was of course Ann Sarnoff, but then it was Toby Emmerich's turn. However, Walter Hamada's contract was running out in October of 2022, so the newly formed company decided to keep him on until his contract ran out, as it is cheaper to let a contract run out than firing the employee. And whilst Hamada was still in power, he had multiple DCEU movies on the go. Now, a cinematic universe usually is supposed to build towards something larger, like Zack Snyder's plan or what Marvel did with Thanos. However, the DCEU since Hamada came in didn't seem to have that. Now, according to multiple trustworthy sources and scoopers, Hamada was using the Flash to erase the past of the DCEU, a soft reboot if you will. His goal was to use the Flash movie to erase Henry Cavill's Superman and Ben Affleck's Batman and replace them with Sasha Calle's Supergirl, Leslie Grace's Batgirl, and Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne. Now, according to The Hollywood Reporter, Hamada's larger plan was a Crisis on Infinite Earths adaptation. For those of you who don't know, Crisis on Infinite Earths is one of the most famous stories in DC Comics. A story where the multiverse is in danger and a character called the Monitor has to recruit DC's greatest heroes across multiple realities to save the multiverse. Meaning we could have seen multiple of the same characters played by other actors, which means we could have seen Henry Cavill's Superman fighting alongside Brandon Routh's Superman, and Cavill's Superman was supposed to appear further down the line. However, that is all we know about that apparent plan. The issue was that none of Hamada's DCEU movies had been hinting at all towards any long-term plan, and every movie seemed to be doing its own thing, which may have been one of the many reasons why his DCEU movies flopped. So on the slate for 2022 and 2023 for Walter Hamada were Black Adam, Batgirl, Shazam! Fury of the Gods, The Flash, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and Blue Beetle. So Hamada had 6 productions being filmed, all planned to be released in 2022 and 2023. And he had also secretly hired James Gunn to write a rebooted Superman story that was disconnected from the DCEU, which was due to the lack of Superman within the DCEU, with Cavill not appearing since 2017's Justice League, which according to Chris McQuarrie was due to Warner Brothers being disinterested in a Superman sequel. The first of Hamada's films to be released was to be Black Adam, a character who originally was Shazam's biggest enemy. However, The Rock had other plans. He wanted to distance Black Adam from Shazam and had his focus on another opponent. However, this opponent was being blocked by DC President Walter Hamada. Now remember that in April of 2022, a new regime came in, and whilst Walter Hamada was still technically the DC President, he had new bosses above him, Pamela Abdi and Mike DeLuca, who were heavily invested in the DCEU, and it didn't take them long to make changes to the DC Extended Universe. At San Diego Comic-Con in July of 2022, The Rock appeared in front of the Comic-Con crowd, promoting Black Adam. He was asked by a fan who would win between Superman and Black Adam, and The Rock's answer clearly created a reaction from fans.
I will say, as you guys know, because we're all in deep with this mythology, and it's been the age-old question of who would win in a fight between Black Adam and Superman. Pound for pound, they're pretty close. I guess it probably all depends on who's playing Superman. I will just say that.
The crowd understood who The Rock was referring to, and that was the first hint at Cavill's possible return to the DCEU. Now remember, at this point in time, Cavill was currently not in the movie at all. But one thing was clear, fans wanted Henry Cavill back as Superman, and The Rock knew it. Dwayne Johnson had stated that he had asked multiple times during the production of Black Adam to bring Cavill back as Superman, but Hamada had said no every time. However, with a new regime in charge, Johnson had other people to persuade. So this time, he wouldn't go to Hamada, who would instantly reject this request again. Instead, he went over Hamada's head to his bosses, Abdi and DeLuca, who obliged to The Rock's request as they were big fans of Cavill, and with their power now being stronger than Hamada's, they did more than bring back Henry Cavill. So whilst the next 5 DCEU movies were Walter Hamada products, they were being changed by the new regime, who were determined to reignite the DC Extended Universe. Now, whilst this was great news for the DCEU, David Zaslav decided in August of 2022 to shelve the $100 million Batgirl movie. claiming it did not meet their quality standards. And this outraged quite a lot of DC fans, but not all was bad news. In September of 2022, a month before Black Adam was released worldwide, Henry Cavill shot the infamous cameo scene for Black Adam, costing Warner Brothers $250,000, with another $250,000 being paid for filming a cameo for the Flash movie too. Reports leaked out that Cavill was in Black Adam, with scoopers revealing the suit Cavill was wearing for the cameo and what theme was being played. And unfortunately for Henry Cavill, some fans criticized the cameo due to the color of the suit and the theme being played. Henry Cavill had decided to wear the Man of Steel suit due to how much that suit means to him. However, some fans were annoyed that it wasn't the black suit that he wore in the Snyder Cut, and the Black Adam crew decided to go with John Williams' theme rather than Hans Zimmer's theme, who was only attached to Cavill's Superman. Some fans complained about these two choices, as in the Snyder Cut, Superman wore the black suit and had Hans Zimmer's theme. So to them, these two decisions implied that this Superman was a continuation of Justice League 2017's Superman, and so they turned on Cavill's return and the Black Adam team. Somehow, what was designed as a positive was turned into a negative by some fans. A week later, Black Adam released in theaters, and its box office ended at a disappointing $393 million worldwide. However, that was without a Chinese release, which could have boosted the box office by more than $100 million. With a reported $200 million budget, a 39% critic score, and an 88% audience score, this was classed as a disappointing performance, but was and is still to this day the best box office result the DCEU has had since Aquaman in 2018. On October 19th, it was announced that Walter Hamada would leave the company, and so the search began for a new DC president. And whilst that search continued, Abdi and DeLuca continued their work on the new DCEU movies, set to be released the following year. Now, the Superman cameo for the Flash movie was for the ending, which would set up a Man of Steel 2. So at this point in time, the Flash movie had two filmed endings. One was setting up Michael Keaton as the Bruce Wayne of the DCEU, with Ben Affleck's Batman lost in time, and Sasha Calle's Supergirl being the only Kryptonian in the DC Extended Universe. And the second ending adding Henry Cavill's Superman and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman to set up Man of Steel 2 and a Wonder Woman 3. Less than a week later, on October 24th, Henry Cavill made it official that he was back as Superman.
Hey everyone, I wanted to wait until the weekend was over before posting this, because I wanted to give you all a chance to watch Black Adam. But now that plenty of you have, I wanted to make it official that I am back as Superman. And the image you see on this post and what you saw in Black Adam are just a very small taste of things to come. So there's a lot to be thankful for, and I'll get to that in time. But I want to thank you guys most of all. Thank you for your support, and thank you for your patience. I promise it will be rewarded.
This moment has been well documented as one of the biggest moments in DC's history, which was seen as a moment of celebration, but fans had no idea what was about to happen. On October 25th, the DCEU's future changed forever. The Hollywood Reporter announced that Warner Bros. Discovery were turning DC into their own studio, and had hired James Gunn and Peter Safran to be the co-heads of DC Studios. James Gunn would handle the storytelling side, and Peter Safran would handle the business side. This sparked confusion amongst fans, as no one had ever predicted those two to take over DC. But the confusion didn't end there. There were murmurs from that moment onwards that the co-heads were not fans of the DC Extended Universe, with rumors spreading that a soft reboot or full reboot were on the horizon. Many of these rumors were tossed aside by fans after hearing the extensive work Abdi and DeLuca were doing to set the DCEU back on track. But 2 months later, on December 15th, Henry Cavill announced that he was told by Warner Brothers in October to announce his return to the role of Superman. However, after long conversations with the DC co-heads, he would no longer be playing Superman. The internet exploded. DC fans outraged and betrayed. After being told he was back, after being told there was more to come, and after reports of a Man of Steel 2 happening, Henry Cavill was no longer playing Superman. But it was official, and there was no going back. Because of this, Cavill's cameo scene for The Flash was removed, as well as Gal Gadot's, as they would set up a future that DC Studios could not promise. And on January 31st, James Gunn announced the reboot of the DC Universe. No longer called the DCEU, but now the DCU, and Chapter 1 was titled Gods and Monsters. Among the slates were a Superman movie and a Batman movie, and Gunn confirmed that no DCEU films are to be connected to the DCU, confirming that this new universe was in fact a reboot with only a few actors sticking around. However, with this announcement releasing on January 31st of 2023, DC still had 4 DCEU movies to be released later on in the year: Shazam! Fury of the Gods, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Now, the DCEU's box office was pretty much declining with every movie, so we don't know factually if the reboot announcement massively impacted DC's 2023 movies. But by the looks of social media, it did have some influence. Even some DC fans were not interested in 2023's DCEU movies. And due to the outrage from many fans after this announced reboot, Snyderverse fans began a new idea. Assuming that Warner Brothers Discovery had no interest in restoring the Snyderverse, they turned their message towards Netflix. The idea was that Netflix would license the DC characters from Warner Brothers to allow Snyder, who was already working at Netflix, to complete his Justice League story. A movement that gained quite a bit of traction, but nowhere near the levels that Restore the Snyderverse once managed to gain. This caused DC fans who were for the Snyderverse and DC fans who were against the Snyderverse to bash heads even more. The online conflict only added to Gunn's reasoning for rebooting the DC Extended Universe. A fresh start could allow the DC fandom to heal or move on from the past. And on March 17th, Shazam! Fury of the Gods released worldwide with a $125 million budget, but only managed to earn $132 million from the box office, and a 49% critic score, but had an 86% audience score. Not soon after, articles released that The Rock had no interest in sharing the screen with Shazam, and in fact allegedly hindered the movie's story by refusing to allow the Justice Society to appear in Shazam 2. Shazam star Zachary Levi shared this article saying, "The truth shall set you free." So there was friction within the DCEU between two actors, which didn't help the DCEU's argument to stick around. Then came along The Flash on June 16th, a movie that had a controversial story as was initially seen as erasing the Snyderverse when Walter Hamada was in charge, but then seen as exciting potential when Abdi and DeLuca added Cavill back into the movie, but then finally was seen as pointless by many when Gunn announced the reboot. Away from the movie, however, Ezra Miller was facing a string of allegations and was arrested a number of times. And in January of 2023, Miller pleaded guilty to unlawful trespass and as a part of a deal, would have to seek mental health treatment. So the reputation of the Flash movie was not very strong. With a $200 million reported budget, the movie managed to only make $266 million at the box office, and a 63% critic score but had an 83% audience score. Another flop for the DCEU. Then on June 27th, James Gunn officially announced that David Corenswet would be playing Superman in his rebooted Superman movie titled Superman Legacy, emphasizing that the DCEU was really coming to an end. On August 18th, Blue Beetle released, only managing to earn $100 $128 million with a $120 million budget, but actually managed to earn a 78% critic score and a 91% audience score. Now, due to the size of the Blue Beetle character when the film was released, and the fact that the movie had no connections to other DCEU movies, nor was it seen by many people at all, James Gunn decided to keep Zolo as Blue Beetle for his DCU. Which leads us to the end of 2023, and the end of the DCEU. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is unfortunately looking like it will be another poor box office performance, and will be the final time we see a DCEU movie released. Over the 10-year lifetime, the DCEU managed to earn around $7 billion from 15 movies. For reference, in the same time frame, the MCU earned around $25 billion. The DC Extended Universe ultimately failed due to the studio behind it. Reactive and controlling executives who were too focused on telling creatives what to do and were obsessing over the critics' reviews were the ones making the calls throughout the entire lifetime of the DCEU. And the fans, the directors, and the box office all were punished because of it. The DCEU has given Warner Brothers Discovery and DC Studios many lessons, and with the DCU properly beginning in 2025, we will see if they have truly learned from their mistakes. But that concludes this documentary, The Downfall of the DCEU.